Economics, Standard 12, Unit 11, Economics of Development and Planning continued. Let us learn today types of planning. Economic planning is a process under which attempts are made to achieve desired target of economic development within a specific period of time. There are different types of planning which differ in ideology and the procedure in execution. The most important types of economic planning are: first, democratic versus totalitarian, centralized planning versus decentralized planning, planning by direction versus inducement, indicative planning versus imperative planning. Democratic planning. Democratic planning implies planning within democracy in a democratic country. People are associated at every step in the formulation and implementation of the plan. The plan prepared by the Planning Commission is not accepted as such. It can be accepted, rejected, or modified by the Parliament of the country. But under totalitarian planning, there is central control and direction of all economic activities in accordance with a single plan. The planning authority is the supreme body in a totalitarian planning. It decides about the targets, schemes, allocations, methods, and procedures of implementation of the plan. And centralized versus decentralized planning. Under centralized planning, the entire planning process in a country is under a central planning authority. This authority formulates a central plan and, of course, fixes objectives, targets, and priorities for every sector of the economy. In other words, this type of planning is called planning from above. Planning from above. Under decentralized planning, local organizations and institutions formulate, adopt, execute, and supervise the plan without interference by the central authorities. In other words, it is called planning from below. Planning by direction versus inducement. Under planning by direction, there is a central authority which plans, directs, orders the execution of the plan in accordance with predetermined targets and priorities. Under planning by inducement, the people are induced to act in a certain way through various monetary and fiscal measures. Indicative planning versus imperative planning. Indicative planning is peculiar to the mixed economy. In a mixed economics, all the sectors, the economic activities are shared both by public sector and private sector. In a mixed economy, the private sector and the public sector work together. The state provides all types of facilities to the private sector. The private sector is expected to fulfill the targets and priorities. The state does not force the private sector but just indicates the areas of operation and targets to be fulfilled. In short, the planning procedure is very soft and flexible flexible in indicative planning. Under imperative planning, the state is all powerful in preparation and implementation of the plan. So under imperative planning, the word imperative, commanding. So the state is all powerful in preparation and implementation of the plan. Once a plan is drawn up, the implementation is a matter of enforcement. So once the plan is drawn up, the implementation is a matter of enforcement. And that is why the USSR former president that states, Stalin, when he was the president of USSR, he used to say, our plans are our instructions. Our plans are our instructions. There is complete control over the entire resources by the state. Complete control over the entire resources by the state. Now, China and Russia follow imperative planning. According to term planning, there are three types of planning, namely short-term plan, medium-term plan, and long-term plan. Short-term plan lasts for 1 year, and so it is known as controlling plans. And also it is called as annual plan or operational plan. And whereas medium-term plan lasts for 3 to 7 years. But normally the medium-term plan is made for the period of 5 years. The medium-term planning is not only related to allocation of financial resources but also physical resources. And that is why it is known as tactical planning. And long-term plan lasts for 10 to 30 years. It lasts from 10 to 30 years. It is known as strategic planning because the basic philosophy behind long-term planning is to bring structural changes in the economy. The basic philosophy behind the long-term planning is to bring structural changes in the economy. And this is also known as perspective plan. And of course, there are the other types of plans, namely financial plan versus physical plan, functional plan versus structural plan, comprehensive plan versus partial plan. Financial plan, of course, related to money. So financial planning refers to the technique of planning in which economic resources are allocated in terms of money. So financial planning is the planning in which way, that is, the resources are allocated in terms of money, while physical planning pertains to the allocation of resources in terms of men, materials, and machinery. So that's the difference between financial planning and physical planning. Financial planning resources are just referred to in terms of money, whereas physical plannings, the resources are in terms of men, materials, and machineries. Functional plan versus structural plan. Functional planning refers to that planning which seeks to remove economic difficulties by directing all the planning activities within the existing economic and social structure. So everything is activated within the existing economic and social structure. So that is functional planning. Whereas the structural planning refers to a good deal of changes in the socio-economic framework of the country. There can be changes in the framework, socio and economic framework of the country. This type of planning is adopted mostly in underdeveloping countries. And of course, finally, comprehensive plan versus partial plan. Comprehensive, the comprehend, to summarize, the whole. And general planning, which concerns itself with the major issues. So, that is the major issues for the whole economy is known as comprehensive plan. The whole economy, the major issues are just brought out in planning is known as comprehensive planning. Whereas partial planning is to consider only the few important sectors of the economy. Only the few important sectors of the economy is just taken in the economic planning, maybe, and that is known as partial planning. So now, we have learned the different types of planning, namely democratic planning versus totalitarian planning, centralized planning versus decentralized planning, planning by direction versus inducement planning, indicative planning versus imperative planning, and in terms of, term planning, we can just see that short planning, medium planning, and long-term planning. And then the other plannings, namely financial planning versus physical planning, functional planning versus structural planning, and comprehensive planning versus partial planning. Hope you understood the different types of planning today. Thank you for